February 13th, 2012, Littleton City Planning Commission meeting. And Doreen, may we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Bagnall.
Here.
Commissioner Bockenstead.
Here.
Commissioner Coronado.
Here.
Commissioner Elrod. Commissioner Newfinke.
Here.
Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Ranville.
Here.
Commissioner Samuelson.
Here.
Got a quorum.
Any commissioners, any changes to the agenda? I would like to, during the report section, during the chair's reports, just to have a brief discussion of the agenda for the next meeting, if that's okay with you guys. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other changes? Seeing none, can we move to the approval for the minutes? The January 23rd, 2012 minutes. Any changes? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve?
So move. Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Dave and seconded by Craig. All those in favor of approving the minutes? And that is unanimous. And that takes us to scheduled or unscheduled appearances, and this is for anybody who's here not related to the case of Brandon Dodge parking lot. So is there anybody here to public or scheduled or unscheduled appearances? Seeing none, let's move to items of general business, and seeing that there's nothing on the agenda, let's move directly to the public hearing. So Ernie? This is a Brandon Dodge parking lot plan development overlay at 5590 South Broadway. It's case number PSP 11-0001.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I'm here to present the Brandon Dodge parking lot PDO. I'd like to start by submitting a list of exhibits. The list of exhibits are as follows. Exhibit A, City Staff Report and Attachments. Exhibit B, Application and Attachments. Exhibit C, Area Reference Map. Exhibit D, City Zoning Ordinance by Reference. Exhibit E, City Sign Code by Reference. Exhibit F, Official Zoning Maps by Reference. Exhibit G, Proof of Posting. Exhibit H, Proof of Publication. Exhibit I, Public Hearing Roster. The applicant, SF Inc., on behalf of the owner, is requesting approval of a plan development overlay that will allow for the demolition of the existing building and construction of a new parking lot to be used for new vehicle display and employee parking. The property is 0.565 acres. It is Zone B2, which is Community Business District. Automobile parking garages and lots are allowed in the B2 zone district upon approval and consideration and approval of a PDO by the Planning Commission. The applicable sections of code are 1095 and 1095G. The subject property was not included in the original comp plan. Subsequently, it was included in the Broadway corridor study. In that study, the property is located in Area A. Area A was identified as automotive commercial district. The existing building was constructed in 1955. It is not located within a historic district or designated as a historic landmark, nor it is on the list of merit. The surrounding properties are all Zone B2. To the north is a Taco Bell. To the south is Brandon Dodge. To the east is an office complex, and to the west is a retail store, the 7-Eleven across the street. Site improvements on this lot will include removal and replacement of existing paved areas, installation of new pavement, lighting, and landscaping. On your PDO plans, you'll note that it is noted that this is an illustrative site plan and illustrative landscape plan. Both are subject to review during the final site plan review, and items like the lighting ordinance and other technical issues will be addressed at that time. The PDO process allows for flexibility within the requirements of the unobstructed open space and distribution thereof. This chart kind of helps to explain the applicant's request. They're requesting a slight waiver. In the B2 zone district, you are required to have 20% unobstructed open space. Of that 20%, 50% or 10% is required to be on the right-of-way, and you get a credit up to 5%. The Brandon Dodge PDO proposes 17.72 unobstructed open space, with 13.35% of it located along the frontages, and they're using 4.6% in the right-of-way. This was reviewed by our landscape architect, and he fully supports this request. We have done this on other car dealerships. Placing the majority of the required landscaping on street frontage reinforces and complements citywide design goals to promote and maintain an attractive, healthy living environment. With that, staff concludes that the proposal for the PDO for Brandon Dodge at 5590 South Broadway should be approved, in that the PDO meets the requirements of Section 1095 and 1095G. The applicant is here. They do not have a formal presentation, but they are here for questions if I can't answer them for you. So with that, I'll take your questions.
Questions? Jenny?
I just want to confirm that there's no requirement for landscape parking islands.
Well,
correct?
That's kind of that exchange that they're not required to put those in.
As part of this process?
Exactly. That's the flexibility. They are allowed to put more cars in there, and we get more landscaping along the street frontage.
I have a question or a clarification. The open space will be 17.72%. So under the proposal, it says the amount of unobstructed open space will increase by 17.72%. So in that area now, is there unobstructed open space?
The site has none currently.
None. Okay.
There's no unobstructed open space on the site.
Okay. The other question I had was from the city engineer office. The on-site detention. They received a waiver from providing on-site detention. So is there any concern with that, or are there other means of how they're going to be addressing that?
That is an issue that is addressed during the site plan, and the site, the engineers reviewed it and didn't feel that it was a requirement they needed to meet. It's tough to answer because it's an engineering question, and again.
So the waiver essentially says they're approving this. Okay.
Exactly.
And then my final question was, I didn't see anything regarding setbacks or sidewalks, and I know that's the discussion we've had for other properties along Broadway. So any comments or discussion on setback or sidewalk requirements?
Well, in this case, the sidewalks, it is different than the last case we had, in that they're not having to plat the property. The sidewalk at the other property, part of the issue was the platting, and plus it was in poor repair. In this case, the sidewalk on Broadway was in State Highway up until recently, and it's in good repair, so the engineering department didn't ask them to repair it. If they find some damage during their inspections, they might have to replace a portion of it. Along Powers, the sidewalk is new within the last 2 years. They just put that sidewalk in.
So this proposal it's using the existing sidewalk that's there now and just building off of that?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes, I'd like to follow up on a couple of things.
Karina said. That comment about the reference on page 2, first paragraph, amount of unobstructed open space will be increased by 17.72%. I think what you really mean is it'll be increased to.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Just want to clarify that for the record. Also, the second paragraph comment about increasing the amount of unobstructed open space distributed along, excuse me, I think we mean along East Powers Avenue and South Broadway?
Actually, most of it, or all of it, will be along Powers. There isn't a lot of right-of-way in the front of the property. The back of walk goes right to...
Great segue, Ernie, because my next question was going to be, can you show us on the plan where the right-of-way runs?
Well, actually, there's this plan here, I don't know how that line was drawn in there, but you see the line drawn along the... If you're looking at it, I see the line that's, I don't know how it was put in there, but I don't know if it represents the right-of-way or not, but basically it is that line.
It's also on the larger plan.
Yeah.
And I believe along Broadway, it's right at the back of the sidewalk. if I'm
Right,
not
the right-of-way
mistaken.
is directly at the back of sidewalk in the front.
Sorry, I must have missed that. The other question I have is, what we're really doing is allowing a redistribution or a reduction because of a redistribution of open space. I've struggled to find where in zoning the requirement that 50% of the required open space be evenly distributed along the right-of-way, or that the credit be given for up to 25% of the required open space if a like amount of the adjacent right-of-way is landscaped. I couldn't find that any place in the zoning code.
That is actually from the code directly. Was it in the... Okay. I'll just put this up on the screen and maybe you can zoom up enough to... The requirement is right here, the distribution of open space.
Can you give me a reference and I can find it in my book, because I can't
It's
read that.
1041C.
Okay. So it's in the supplementary standards. It's not in either the B2 zoning section
Correct.
or in the PDO section.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Craig?
Yeah, can I just follow up on David's question? Where the requirements along the right-of-way, it's not necessarily in the right-of-way, am I correct? It's
Right,
along
it's along the right-of-way. In this case, they are putting some in the right-of-way because they have a lot on that side.
Okay. And then I think I heard you said that David Flagger, the landscape architect, has reviewed the planting plan already?
Yes, he has.
Okay.
And he will review it again during final site development plan to make sure.
All right.
Or the ingress egress on Broadway will be closed off? And then
Yes,
will no
it's
longer-
only going to be temporarily closed off. The applicant's going to close it off, but for future development, they didn't want to close the curb cut. But by the landscaping there, you see it'll close it off, but the curb cut will remain.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, just I meant to ask that same question. Thank you, Kurt. Will it actually be physically removed and replaced with a sidewalk and curb?
No. The landscaping will be installed. I believe they've talked about putting a gate across it so no one gets the illusion that you could drive across there, but the curb cut will remain.
I'm sorry, I missed that. They're going to put what in front of it?
Well, actually, when you look at the site, I don't think it shows up. There's a small fence at the back of the landscaping, so someone doesn't think they can drive in there. And I don't know if they're adding a gate there. If it becomes an issue, they may have to. It won't appear to be an access other than the curb cut, but you'd be driving into landscape to go in there.
Other questions? Okay.
I'm not sure I'm really going to make a big deal about it, about this site, but as with other cases when we've gone through and looked at application of zoning to individual sites, the question keeps coming up, why are we deferring on this and deferring on that? And I guess in this case, I'm going back to Karina's earlier comment. The Broadway Corridor Plan talks a lot about drainage problems in the area. Granted, the worst of them are farther down to the south, but it does talk about consistent drainage problems throughout the corridor. So why, I assume consistently, this is not the first time, why do we keep deferring on the question of detention? Doesn't that just keep pushing the drainage problem along? Just me. I mean, maybe it's something we need to talk about with community development down the road, but it seems like we're accumulating several things like that need discussion. I guess that sounded like a rhetorical question, Ernie, and I didn't mean it to be. Is there some justification for continually deferring and waiving detention?
Well, the engineering department looks at that. That's their decision. The director of public works looks at the site, decides if it is required or not, based on criteria that he has, and it's his decision to waive that. And he has that power to do that.
Okay, my comment there, Madam Chairman, is going to be, as we discovered with the previous case on the sidewalk width, what the written code says and what common usage has come to be are not the same thing. If one of our goals over the last 4 years was to get the comp plan and zoning to be filled with predictability and objective standards that are applied to everybody, I'd like staff to take that under advisement. That is another example of things like that we need to talk about. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one. In your staff report, Ernie, it says the new vehicle display parking lot area is not for public use, yet in the letter submitted by Doug Moreland, he says that the new overflow parking lot for new cars only. So I was kind of confused first at, is this truly a parking lot? Is this an overflow parking lot? And define the new vehicle display.
Well, the display area, the only part of the property that has to meet the parking requirements is the back spots back here, 12 spaces. The display area is up to the applicant how he wants to put the cars in there. Cars won't be driving through the drive aisles there. All it is new vehicles. That's what is meant. It's not for public use. So if somebody comes into this property, they will be walking to walk around the cars. They won't be driving, trying to coordinate getting there. I mean, you've been at car dealers. They have a knack at getting as many cars as they can in there. And so in this case, that's what that area will be. How many they can get in there is up to them. But cars will not use that to access or drive around the property. That's why it's not for public use. People will be walking, but not driving.
So the parking isn't for public use?
Right. The only spaces that even somewhat are for the public are the ones in the back, and that's for their employees. Did you see in the back the 12 that are in the very back?
Okay.
The 12 spaces along the back, yeah.
Is there signage to that effect? Do they have any signage?
They have an existing sign that's already up
On this?
on that piece right there, yeah. They own the property now, and they have cars on there, but it's not right now it's not a parking lot. They cannot park cars on the entire piece. That's why they're going through this process.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a few more comments, but I think I'll save that for our discussion.
Discussion, okay. Seeing no other questions, this is, does the applicant wish to say anything? Okay, so that this is a public hearing, and we have 2 names on the public hearing roster, and a Jorge, unfortunately, I can't read the last name. Iguerta. And it says that you favor the project, but you do not wish to speak. Do you want to speak at all? Okay. And then we have, it looks like a Scott. Okay, so you have no address or anything, but it doesn't say whether you favor the project or do you wish to speak. Do you wish to speak? Please come to the mic and just state your name real quick.
Clarify
where the employee parking is, there is actually a right-of-way that goes through there, and there's going to be a fence, a small fence that will separate where the cars can't go in and out of the parking lot itself. So it's, I know in the drawing it kind of looks like you can drive through, but you can't because there will be a small little 2-foot fence to keep the cars for security. I don't know if you guys are clear of that or not.
Okay.
But that's right up against the right-of-way. It's not in the right-of-way, hence the State Highway Department's comment that no work is going to be done in the right-of-way. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Seeing none, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
I motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
So it's been moved by Jenny and seconded by Steve. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. So that takes us to discussion.
Do you have a motion to discuss?
Oh, yeah, we need a motion to discuss, so.
So I move that the Planning Commission Resolution Number 12-01 for Brandon Dodge Plan Development Overlay be approved.
Second.
Okay, it's been motioned and seconded. So all discussion until we vote. Any,
Somebody want to jump in? Or?
of course, I look at you, Dave.
I know. I'm always shooting my mouth off. Okay, I'm going to run us through a series of references in the zoning ordinance. For those of you who were foresighted enough to bring the dictionary, the encyclopedia, and every other reference book, Section 1095GC talks about assuring that, and now I'm going to have to look it back up. I made notes, and now I really want to quote it. That the use will be adequately screened from adjacent streets and abutting uses with landscape standards per Section 1057. 1057A3 talks about shrub sizes or landscaping materials. And again, I'm trying to get back to it. I've tagged it, but I've tagged a lot of things. Calling for the top of the landscape screen around the parking area being at least 3 feet higher than the surface of the parking area. 1057B calls for the use of non-living landscape, decorative, mulch, that sort of thing, not exceeding 50% of the total required landscaping area. And 1059E4 calls for shrubs, and I grant you that a lot of what's being planted out there doesn't really qualify as shrubs. Craig, I'm probably going to defer to you on that. A lot of it is decorative grasses. But the requirement in code is that they should be of a size at least 5 gallons. Most of the materials out there, most of the non-tree materials out there are not. I have no problem with the plan as presented. It's certainly an improvement over everything else that you see out there in that auto strip. Precious little landscaping is done along the street, much less between the sites. Not that a lot of landscaping is done between this site and the office property to the east. Overall, it's an attractive plan. It is an improvement over what's there. My concern continues to be code says one thing, recommended practice or practice continually is eroding on that. I wonder why we have lines, why we have guidelines, codes or otherwise, if we're continually backpedaling away from them. That's my concern in the long run. It's the cumulative effect of ignoring things that are in the code. I understand the PDO's intent to inspire creativity. Again, I think we're missing something in terms of our values, either through comp plan or the zoning code, when we can sit there and say, let's increase, let's add a 5-foot strip of rock mulch and some low shrubs along a side street rather than break up the massive parking with shaded tree islands. I mean, there's a value judgment there that seems to have been totally disregarded. I think we really need to have some discussion about some of these things and instead of just depending on numbers in the zoning code. That's my 2 cents worth.
Okay. Okay, Craig?
Can I add? Yeah, I think on page 2 here, it says, in evaluating a request for a variance like this, the Planning Commission shall consider whether or not the proposed development has demonstrated special attention to creative and high-quality design. And as a landscape architect, I tend to agree with Dave that this could have been done better. First, on the trees that are selected, I want to talk to staff about that, but I certainly wouldn't propose the trees that are being used there. They're not specific to Colorado or this zone. They're all small trees. There's a Texas ash on here, which, as far as I know, is a Zone 7 plant. We're in Zone 5. And there's also a thin-leaf alder, which is normally sort of a shrubby plant that's found in wetland natural areas. Great plant for a gulch or something, but not for a street tree. So I'd recommend that you take the plant list back and look at those. Also, the size of the trees, 2-inch caliper is pretty small for a street tree. I'm not exactly sure what the city's minimum requirements are that might meet it, but it's still pretty small.
In some cases, it exceeds it.
On the shrubs and perennial grasses. The perennial grasses are generally a pretty good substitute for shrub. I think I would accept those in the most part. But Hemerocallis, that dies back completely in the winter, so it doesn't screen anything. And at a 1-gallon size, which is very small, again, I defer to the city's landscape standards, but that's a pretty small plant, especially along a major corridor like this. And then sorry, I lost my train of thought there. The spacing on them was quite large. Some of them actually 9.5 feet on center. Usually shrubs are placed 3 to 5 to 6 at the most. So I'd look at the spacing and that as well.
Can I tag on to that by asking staff, because I couldn't find it. There's nothing in section 10.5 that really defines how much landscaping materials needs to be in open space. So what kind of standards are we looking for as far as coverage, sizes of trees versus shrubs versus low ground covers, decorative grasses? Is there any kind of definition that we just aren't seeing, Ernie? Or is it left to the creativity of the property owner or
Landscape
developer?
architect looks at the plan, and it's in the 10.5.7 of the code, and that's what he bases on it. And keep in mind, he will be looking at this again, and some of the
That's
issues.
why I'm offering these
right,
comments.
And these issues will be addressed during that.
So there's nothing about numbers or density or anything
Well,
else other than minimum space or maximum spacing, minimum spacing and heights and caliper.
Well,
and that sort
per
of thing.
like landscaping rules of how far things should be spaced apart, I mean, that's kind of a natural thing that's per plants.
But nothing to say half a dozen trees and 100 shrubs is enough, or no, it ought to be twice that. I mean, what kind of guidelines, as a developer, if I were coming in to ask the question, what kind of guidelines could I be shown saying this is at least a minimum of what we expect?
I'll just give you a little history. When the landscape regulations were adopted, I've been here about 20 years ago. At that time, council did not want to adopt a regulation that specified 50 trees per 10 square feet, or 10 trees in an island in the lands in the parking lot. They wanted some flexibility left so that the landscape architect could review it and use some reasonable determination on number of trees and spacing, because we have some, like South Park, for instance, has covenants, and they have very strict covenants that require like a boatload of trees in a very small area, which is not good for survival. And so I'm just giving you a little history. That's why Chapter 5 doesn't say that they have to have 50 trees in this area. It was council's choice at that time to keep that type of quantity at the discretion of a professional that was reviewing those plans.
So basically left up to professional judgment as to whether it meets the criteria of adequately screening.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, go.
Any other comments? Jenny?
Just in general, with having laid out a number of parking lots, that typically your parking, as far as creativity of looking at this process, providing no parking or no islands with landscaping, that certainly is not enhancing the parking lot. And that's one of the points. I know that you're trying to maximize parking, obviously, and but it would be nice to see a few parking islands within.
I think he's asking if he can respond.
Yeah, I'm looking to staff. Is that okay? Okay. Yes. And just state your name for the record. And
Jorge Guiarte, and I'm with SF Inc. And regarding to Mrs. Ramville's comment, because this is a private parking lot, we don't require to do the islands and put the trees and stuff. If it was a public parking lot, yes. But this is more like a private for storing new vehicles. That's why we're not putting any islands or on trees in the middle of the parking lot. That's the only reason.
okay. Thank you.
And the obvious follow-up to that is, if they weren't required to do any interior landscaping, then what are they giving up in order to do this stuff on the outside, and where they aren't really adding landscaping along Broadway, which I could understand there'd be some city value to the city in seeing that it's going along the side streets. So what exactly are we gaining here, besides a 3.5% or 4%, whatever it is, reduction in the amount of landscaping?
I guess as I see it, there are landscape improvements. They're within that buffer between the sidewalk and the parking. They will be adding planting, which is much better than what's out there now. But I would add another, it's a request as this goes back, the temporary closure of that curb cut, I would certainly like to see that as a permanent closure and with some improvement to the sidewalk there. Because as you know, when you're walking along a sidewalk and you walk along a curb cut, it's not handicap accessible. And it's so close to that intersection, too. The city, it seems like it would be desirable from a city engineer's standpoint to close something that close to an intersection on a busy road like that permanently.
Sounds like we're saying in the short term, the real question is, most of our questions are things we'd like to defer to staff and working out final details to really live up to the idea of adequately screening and a benefit to the city. Long term, I think we want to talk about where we're really going with definitions and living up to the code versus constantly giving exceptions. I'm still a little bothered by the fact I don't see how we're really getting the added benefit that the PDO exception is supposed to be giving us, much less any kind of significant screening. I'm hoping that staff will improve on that, but that's my take on it.
Any other comments? Are we ready to vote? Come on to the mic and state your name for the record.
As far as the entranceway, there is going to be a gate there. There is landscaping there. There's going to be a telescopic pole that'll be locked off. There'll be no entrance in or out of that space. We discussed this with the city several times. They were very happy with that. The other thing is, if we don't get approved, we're not going to do anything. That's where we're at. We're going to leave this eyesore there, and that's what you're going to be stuck with. So I think we really want to do this not only for us, but for the city as well. And so it's very important that we hopefully can get this approved and make the site look a lot better than it already does. Or worse, it looks bad now, make it look better than it does. So please take that into consideration. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I was with him right up to the point where he said, if we don't get this approved, and that was irritating. I don't like seeing the city threatened.
Okay, do we have any other comments? Are we ready to vote?
I'm sorry, Craig. Order. Can we vote with conditionally approve, or would the comments that how would the comments that we just requested back?
Well, you have a motion and a second, which you need to vote on, but then if you want to make a new, either amend that or make a new motion with conditions, that's okay.
Okay. We can make a motion to add some conditions now before we vote on the overall motion, correct?
You'd have to vote on the amendments first, yes.
Okay. So I would move that we request the applicant to add some additional, or look at the planting plan so that they use the appropriate materials there, appropriate spacing, to justify what I would consider the request for an enhancement here, and also to re-review the need for the curb cut to remain as a temporary curb cut. If that's totally at the discretion of the city engineer, but my preference would be to have it removed and replaced with sidewalk. So that's a motion, I guess. Did you get that?
I'll second that.
Okay, so it's been moved by Craig and seconded that to request the applicant to review planting plans, including spacing, and request enhancement and re-review if the temporary curb cut is appropriate.
Planting types and spacing.
Okay, planting.
Close the hearing.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to try and anticipate what he may be saying. As it exists right now, that stretch of curb cut effectively is a sidewalk. Anyone walking across there, handicapped or otherwise, has to negotiate it now. What he's proposing is to at least put a barrier so nobody's going to try and drive over it. It isn't either going to worsen or improve the situation as a sidewalk. On the other hand, tearing it out and replacing it with a curb and a sidewalk instead of driveway pan not only increases his costs, it also gets him involved in the highway department, which up to now has waived any involvement because they're not doing any work in the right-of-way. I can understand the objection. I don't see anything necessarily to be gained by requiring that they tear it out and replace it with a vertical curb and sidewalk. Just my comment.
All this motion is asking is a review.
Yes.
You know, it's not binding,
It's just saying review, it's not saying actually do it.
right? So,
What would we get out of the review other than what David just shared with us?
to me, I think from what Craig was saying, we'd get much more appropriate landscape, better screening from Broadway. And
I meant the review of the sidewalk, evaluating the sidewalk.
Yeah, it's a separate issue.
yeah,
Right.
they're really two separate.
What we'd get is staff deciding to look at it again and probably come to the same conclusion they say they came up with before, and probably reflecting what I was saying, that it's a lot of effort and no material gain.
We would actually have it on record.
That we had
that,
concerned about it?
That
it was our
it was
concern.
concerned by us, and we asked staff to do it.
Are we ready to vote on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? And that is unanimous. Okay, any more amendments? Craig, do you want?
Yeah, I was just going to go ahead and make a motion, or
Call the
call the
question.
question on the vote. We've already made the motion, right?
Okay. So,
Motion is to approve.
yep, the motion is to approve the resolution for the Brandon Dodge Plan Development Overlay. So all those in favor of the approval? And that is unanimous. And thank you very much.
And for the record, Madam Chairman, I voted for it, but I still don't like being threatened.
All right, that takes us to our next agenda item, which is reports. And that takes us to staff reports. And our first in the staff report is the urban center designation process.
I revised the memo that we put in the packet a little bit, added a little bit more to it, so I'm going to pass those out.
Thank you, Dennis.
I think you're all very familiar with this concept. It's part of the discussion we had during the downtown plan process. And it's one of the key recommendations for implementation for the plan. And so it seems like it's time to move forward with that at this point. Dr. Cog has been going through a revision to the process, and they are kind of up and running and ready to go. What you see in the memo that I handed out is just kind of a quick background that you're familiar with already in terms of what the MetroVision calls for in terms of urban centers, what the concept is, the concept basically being that we've got a certain amount of growth that we're anticipating in metropolitan Denver. We have a growth boundary for metropolitan Denver that we've created among the municipal jurisdictions in the region, and said this is the area that we want to continue to grow within. And then within that, there's a policy that says we should try and concentrate that development so that we are as efficient as possible in terms of our expenditures using existing infrastructure. When we need additional infrastructure, let's make sure we get the highest and best use out of that, that we get the most efficient use of what we are paying for and what we have in place already. And so the concept is to go, let's look at those locations which have a potential for some additional development. And the anticipation is that Metro-wide, those will take a huge chunk of the additional development within that urban growth boundary. That's not case by case. Some urban centers have much less growth potential. Others have more. Some are huge. Some are small. So there's a lot of variety in terms of what you're looking at. And one of the things I added to the packet was a map on the last page, which starts to show a little bit in terms of kind of how they're distributed currently. And if you look on there and you're kind of familiar with and kind of figure out where some of those are, some of them obviously are, urban centers. Others are not.
Could we put it on the display?
Sure. Mm-hmm. We are, let's see, okay, here's Jefferson County, here's Douglas County. So this is Santa Fe coming down. This is I-25 coming down. And this is Highlands Ranch Town Center here, the southernmost one. This is out on 247 rather, excuse me. It's an area that may not recognize as an urban center, but it's an area that's anticipated to have some additional development. And that's true in a couple of these locations, that there's an expectation along this highway system that we will see some additional development. Dr. Cog has gone through and pointed out particular sites that they say, we think this is an area that should be included as an urban center. One of those sites is downtown Littleton. And so it's a recommendation that comes out of the plan. We think it makes sense. What I've included in here as well is, I added one more thing. First thing that was in here already, that was kind of a general description of the benefits and limitations of the urban center designation. Just kind of that first chart on top of page 3. It basically says, what's a benefit, what's a limitation. It's a real subjective kind of analysis in terms of, does this make sense? The one that you see, I think probably is most telling is the one number 2, and that's the one I think becomes the question for a community in terms of, is this how we identify ourselves? Is this who we want to be identified with in terms of what we are? So that's the only question, I think, in terms of benefit or limitation. The others are actually pretty objective in terms of, yes, there's money available, that type of thing. And starting that, down at the bottom of the page, I've added a list that goes on to the next page as well, page 4, which shows that the grants were made in 2000 for for fiscal year 2012 in the metro area. CMAQ stands for, let's see.
Air quality is the
Thank you.
something.
Yeah, it's one of those. It is actually, I have it written, I actually wrote it down because I can never remember what it is. But I don't know where I wrote it. Anyway, yeah, you're right. It's air quality. Basically, it's an air quality improvement program. And so that's the funding that's available. It's a federal fund that is, like most federal funds, channeled through Dr. Cog. So Dr. Cog then went through and allocated these funds to different programs, planning programs in the metropolitan area. And that continues. On the next next page as well. So you start to see it's fairly substantial in terms of the kind of funding that is available. And that's relatively new. We've always talked about what is available, and it's been fairly small in terms of maybe a bicycle program, maybe a sidewalk program, some fairly small. This starts to get into some fairly substantial funding that is really good funding for studies particularly. Yes?
Federal funding, it's all federal?
This is all federal funding channeled through Dr. Cog, it sure is. So the CMAQ is federal, and then the local match is in the middle, and then this is the total in the third.
So the local match comes from the local community?
Local jurisdiction, right, yeah. So whoever's proposing, if it's a county or it's a city, and we have a combination of them in here. So the next thing is just talking about the basic process for the assessment. How does Dr. Cog go through and decide which area should be an urban center, which area should not be an urban center? And the basic thing is that they've got a vision statement in terms of what they see metropolitan Denver being and what the individual jurisdictions will be. And they talk about these urban centers, and they go through and they say that they are basically what you've talked about in the downtown plan. They're pedestrian scale, they are pedestrian friendly, they're bicycle friendly, they have a diversity of housing, they provide for a diversity of residents. And so it goes through. The one thing that I think is a little bit sticky sometimes is that when you talk about what's that mean in terms of actual intensity of development, and all they're asking for is that it be more intense than the area around it. So if it's more intense than the surrounding neighborhoods, that's what meets their definition in terms of an area that's a concentration of development. So it doesn't have to be downtown Denver dense. It doesn't have to be some of the areas that you'll see, Denver Tech Center, some other places. So, but it is just having that low concentration. And if you go back and look at the map again, you'll see that that's consistent with the areas that have been designated. So it's a two-cycle process. First cycle basically being staff meets with Dr. Cog's staff, and we go through and talk about what we're thinking about in terms of geographic area, what kind of information we have, just kind of the general character, and trying to what we're thinking in terms of how we think that we do meet or do not meet their criteria. And then they come back and say, here's what we think you need to propose. So it's tailored pretty much to each jurisdiction and each urban center proposal in terms of what's actually necessary in this case. And that has to be completed by the 1st of June. There's a second phase that goes through by the end of the year where we actually get into all this detail in terms of what is required in terms of material. And so I've listed most of that here. And then it goes back and talks about the percentages for the evaluation. If you're talking about how do they actually determine, this is how they go through and look at it. They say, okay, we are looking at these different percentages in terms of the things you have to have, basically. So that's, you've got it. So on the left-hand column, you have kind of individual percentage that it counts. This is towards your A or your B. And on the right, it's the running total. So you're at 80%, you're 90%, you're 100% for each of those. So existing and proposed housing and employment densities is 10%. Existing and proposed efforts to create an urban center is 25%. If you're trying to create one that's active, bicycle, pedestrian, and transit friendly. So they're really looking at that kind of activity more than they're looking at the density. Yeah, David.
How are those? What are those percentages of? I mean, how are these percentages calculated?
Of your total grade, if you're going for an A and you need 100 points to get an A, that's each of the 10 points, 25 points to get there. So you have to get up to 100 points to get an A. If you only get 90 points, you'll get a B. 80 points, you'll get a C. So that's basically how it is. And then they rank them in terms of who else is proposing at that point.
How are the target numbers for that measurement set in a given location?
It's their evaluation based on the proposal, the information that we provide. So we'll provide information to them saying, and then we'll provide a justification saying, here's why we think we meet this. And so they'll evaluate what we have, and they'll work with us as well to say, can you or can you not? If it's not possible to meet something, then we'll have to figure out how we go around it and get more points someplace else, perhaps.
Okay, so these criteria are set up on their way of determining how far we've come in meeting the goals that we've set.
Correct.
My question is, what is their yardstick for determining the adequacy of the goals that we set?
I think they look at track record, as much as anything. So it's that kind of subjective in terms of how are you, what have you been doing so far, what have you done to date, where are you now? So they're looking at existing conditions as well as what you have in place for the future. So they look at our comp plan, they look at the downtown neighborhood plan, they'll look at the existing zoning, they'll look at housing projects that we have, the kind of activity we have, they'll look at our sidewalks and bicycle system, and they'll look at the fact we have light rail and we have the bus system down here. So all those things can come into play.
So I just want to make sure I understand that as well. So this, what's here as individual percentage, this is illustrative. So we could, as they evaluate us, we could have 8% for one, but we can have 32% for two. Or this is the max you can get on an individual basis?
This is the max, yeah. This is the max you can get. So we will move forward with that. The thought is that we would have a meeting with Dr. Cog, talk to them in terms of where we, what we need to be doing, and then check back with you and just let you know where we are in the process. But I think we're looking good in terms of what we have in place currently with the plan and with the zoning and with the kind of development that we've been seeing to date for meeting the goal from the plan to actually have this accomplished. So,
I have some more questions. Okay. Dennis, when you were saying that part of the process is to identify where the boundaries are, so I come back to what was stated as a goal here. It says go within the region. So are we trying to define what is region for us, whether it's the downtown area or the city of Littleton or some modification of that?
This one is just, we would be looking at just downtown itself, and so we'd use the existing boundaries for the plan.
We would or would not? We would.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's the intent at this point, is to use that you guys worked long and hard in terms of developing those boundaries. We're comfortable with those boundaries, and we can move forward with that. So we've got that consistent effort.
So that's what would be defined as region as per the goal statement in our case.
Let me see. What page are you on? I'm sorry.
The second page.
And which one? I'm sorry. In the goal?
So under the goal statement.
Okay.
So in the region, would region for us mean the downtown area?
No, actually, and again, I think that's part of the confusion on this, and I know we've had other people confused on this, and Dr. Cog has had been dealing with this a little bit. The region in that case is metropolitan Denver. So that's not our region. So we don't have to put those percentages in. We could have a much smaller percentage of our population growth going in there. It's just, that's their hope region-wide, yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah. And when you look at the whole set of urban centers, it starts to make sense. If we're all downtown Littleton, you couldn't do that. But if you have downtown Denver and the Denver Tech Center and Stapleton and DIA and all those areas, you start to say that, yeah, that could happen.
I think that but is generally what's referred to on page 4 under general, item 1. It says designation process, et cetera, also considers local circumstances. So I think that's our out there, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a fairly old program. They've been doing this for 15 years or so, and so it's evolved over time. It's gotten much more manageable, much more accessible for most of us. It was very difficult initially. They've learned a lot in the process in terms of what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve with it, and what's important in terms of what you have for information, what you have in terms of your basic qualities of an area. So they're getting there, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Any cost to the city other than staff time?
Staff time is really it. That's it. There's no application fee. There's nothing else. So it'd just be staff time.
And looking at these, the dollar amounts that they've put together here, and everything appears to be just some plan or study.
Right.
Has there been anything actually done with these plans or
The
studies?
first phase, this grant that came through the feds was just for planning. And it's really gearing up for larger phases later, which will have implementation, which will have dollars. And so there was a real effort to get in on that first phase, so you kind of have your leg in the door, so that you would then be able to say, yeah, we've got our plan in place, and you've got the funds now for implementation. We're ready to go. But so that's this list is that group of folks.
If we receive some funds for a study or a plan, what would we do with those?
I think that's one of the things we need to look at it. I mean, it's a different process for us in terms of, what are council's objectives for downtown? What do they want to do? And at this point, we really don't have anything in mind at all. We don't know what it would be if there's a need for additional connections, whatever it might be. So it's really open, I think.
So is the funding that's available through this program just for studies, or is it also part of for implementation?
This first phase, this first year of fiscal year 2012 was just for plans and studies. And with the thought that they wanted the plans and studies in place, they would fund that. And this program was relatively small nationwide. And then the thought was they would then go ahead and with the later phases look at implementation, how they actually do construction, if that's called for. One thing, if you look through who's in here and who was kind of really in a hurry to get on, these are primarily areas along the new light rail systems. And so they were looking at how do we get some kind of handle on those TOD stops, things that Littleton's been dealing with for 10 years now, or longer, 15 years. So in terms of actual planning for it and getting it and gearing up for it. So they're just really trying to get on top of it. So that's why a lot of these really jumped at it.
Although the general question about how much money is there for planning or for implementation, the answer could change after November.
Exactly.
My experience with these types of plans is that they identify and they become, by going through the planning process, they make it more predictable for developers to move in and also identify infrastructure needs so that they can both be funded, some by private development, some by infrastructure.
The basic idea being to get a local community to commit to those kinds of enhancements that would seem to favor or invite development, and so that developers would see, they've committed, they're in the urban center designation, they're making progress. Okay.
Karina?
Yep. So coming back to the question of what does it cost us other than staff time, but if a study is secured, there's still a component of it that we, as a region, have to contribute.
Absolutely. If the city decides to go for a grant in the next phase, there would be a local match.
Okay. And how is that determined, or it depends on the study? Or
depends on the study.
So it seems like it goes.
The cities put together, or the jurisdictions put together their own proposals, and like we would do any other consulting, we would say, what's this going to cost in terms of staff time, in terms of in-kind costs, in terms of direct dollars. Do we need to hire somebody? Can we do all this in-house? It's all that kind of evaluation goes on, but the city would actually put together the proposal and the dollar amounts, and then say, okay, this is a percentage that we can put forward.
Is it a fair statement to say the sooner we get in, the more of an opportunity there is to get funding versus if we're coming in towards the end of the year, a lot of the funds have been allocated and therefore there's less money to pitch for?
At this point, we would wait. If the city wanted to go forward with a grant proposal, it would be 2013, and there's a separate deadline process. So it's both that and also the application for the urban centers are kind of, there's a deadline, get it in now. So it's probably not a real rush in either case, either to get this application in. As long as we meet their deadlines, they're expecting Littleton at some point to come forward just because they see us sitting there as not having an urban center designation. So at some point, they would be willing to work with us.
And so at this point, we're working towards this June 1st deadline for the initial process?
Correct.
And I'm sorry, how long will this take? 6 months, a year, 3 years?
Well, the actual application is done in a year. So by the time the second phase is done, you would know if you're designated or not. And then, as Kurt said, it's going to depend on, or David said, I guess, it's going to depend on, what Congress funds. So if they fund more, if they don't fund more, if they think it's a good program, not a good program, how's the economy doing? There's lots of variables on all those things. So.
Just one quick thing is, have you thought about any unintended consequences from becoming an urban center?
Well, that's the thing we tried to do in that one matrix, that first one, was are there any? And again, the only unintended consequence I think is that we have an issue in terms of trying to preserve our small town character, and so is this consistent with that? And I think that's the big question. The answer to that largely is development occurs, and we've got the zoning in place. There are property rights attached to that zoning. There's entitlements that go on with all the things that are in place at this point. So to some degree, things are going to happen, and this is just directing that to the degree, just like the plan did. So that's the only unintended consequence, I think, is maybe just that labeling, that you now are an urban center, whereas before you weren't. And are we comfortable doing that or not doing that? So I think it's more that psychological thing, kind of than anything else that I can think of. I can't think of any others. There may be some, but I haven't been able to think of
Would Dry Creek Center also be considered, the Dry Creek light rail station around there? Would that be something we would consider down the road?
Mineral? Mineral station? It certainly would. It might qualify, yeah, just because it is a light rail station. It does have the shopping center. It does have housing. I think particularly with Ensor coming through, if that develops at some point, we don't when that's going to happen, but if that does occur, that certainly, makes sense. And that might be something to think about in advance in terms of are there going to be costs associated with that occurring that we'd like to get ahead of in terms of having some dollars attached to that.
So really, this doesn't require us to do anything specifically as far as absolute numbers on density or housing units or jobs or anything else. What it says, what it's inviting us to do is identify how far we propose to go or would hope to go in that regard, and then measure our progress toward it.
Correct.
It's up to us if we find that even after we've carefully examined the goal and set the goals, we find that going too far toward those goals wipes out some of the small town character or something. It's up to us to withdraw. The only penalty is we're no longer able to tap into those funds that are available. So it isn't forcing us to change the character of the community. Right. The one thing I do find, I have to say, a bit amusing is this is obviously intended to be an outgrowth of comprehensive planning, or inspire revitalization of those communities on which we're borderline who haven't updated their comp plan in 30 years. I find it interesting that after all the struggles of the last 6 to 12 months to take specificity and numbers out of the comp plan we produced for downtown, now we're going back to it. I find that amusing in a wry sort of way.
Any other comments? Are we ready to move to the next agenda item? Okay.
Thank you for sharing that, Dennis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, Dennis, thank you.
And the next agenda item by staff is the parking brainstorm.
As you remember, Commissioners, last time, wanted to just maybe have a chance to throw ideas out on the board and just record them for posterity till we get in a little bit more deep into the parking study. So you didn't want to be burdened by facts, and I understand that. And I think actually there would be beneficial just to kind of get the creative juices going. So Dennis has got a sheet, and I'm sure you've all been thinking about this for the last 2 weeks.
And just as a general ground rule, let's get all of the items out on the board without any discussion until we finish. So,
Excellent.
All right, who's willing to go first?
Okay, I'm going to throw one out that I don't think we've talked about in the past. In looking through aerial views of the downtown area, I find a lot of chaos in the little parking areas that are behind buildings and beside buildings and right on the street. I'm just wondering if we couldn't do some sort of study to look at trying to improve the efficiency of the open space on properties around downtown set aside for parking. It's a total mess. A lot of inefficiencies as far as access and how many square feet in the entire lot is required for each parking space. That might be a starting point and virtually no cost to anybody.
Okay. Another idea?
I have another. Do you want me to just throw out the 3 ideas out there? Okay. All right, well, one that was actually an idea at the bicycle, one of the master planning sessions, that I believe one of the city staff was brainstorming on, of that you can get bicycle racks that will bolt into parking stalls, and you can park about 20 bikes, and that seasonally you can put a few in different locations, bolted in, and then once the weather changes and you have more snow and ice, then you just remove them and it goes back to car parking. So that was, I thought, a neat way to get a lot of bicycle parking spaces seasonally. And the second one is looking at more so residential development and looking at giving for bicycle sharing and also car sharing, and having a parking reduction based on how many bikes or cars are available to residents. And I think this could be great for multifamily, and especially with the car sharing, I think could be really advantageous. And the third, and actually this comes a bit from David, and mentioning looking at downtown in the parking issues, is looking at as a mall setting in the sense of for the commercial businesses, in that looking at the parking requirements more like a mall, and that you really have shops that are there, there's a bulk parking available, and it's shared. And so unless there's a big anchor store that goes in that's a regional draw, that a lot of the shops will come, be maybe added or replaced, but yet I think the focus is looking at more from a mall perspective, and maybe there's a formula for how that would be calculated.
Okay, next. I'll throw one out there. There was a program that they did downtown when they were redeveloping the lofts, and they were saying in lieu of a parking space, we'll give you a free moped. So some sort of incentive as there's more dense housing development in the area, an incentive to bypass or give up parking spaces, and that incentive be in some other form of transportation, whether it's mopeds or bikes or transit tickets, etc.
Okay. Greg?
Okay, I've got a few. One is whatever study or next step on this, I think should look at the real cost of a parking spot downtown, the real cost in terms of not only construction and maintenance, but sort of opportunity cost if it wasn't there. And I know other cities have done this where they assign a cost, and then that cost is recognized by, it's either part of something that taxpayers pay for as we do now in Littleton, or perhaps they're paid for by meters, heaven forbid, or maybe that cost is applied to those who benefit most from them into some sort of centralized parking system through a business improvement district or something like that. So that's one thought. The second is, along the lines of the moped, or there could be more variety of parking downtown where we provide some specific designated handicap spots on the street and parallel parking areas, and perhaps for compact vehicles, and we can get some more in. And, I think those smart cars, you could park two of those perpendicular to the curb in one parking spot. So, perhaps there's opportunities to do something creative there. Then the last one is along the lines of what Jen was saying. There's also what they call a pop-up park. You might have seen these in some other cities. New York is doing it. Seattle's doing it. And the company that actually invented it is here in the Denver metro area. And they make sort of a prefabricated one that you kind of bolt into the curb temporarily for the summer, and the adjacent landowner can can pay for it and expand their outdoor patio space. If they have a restaurant or something, they could put some tables and umbrellas out where there was a parking spot, and recognize the revenue that that counteracts the cost of doing it, and it makes a vibrant, sort of thriving Main Street. It activates the Main Street. So
I think it really shows the cost of parking too.
Yeah, true.
What could happen in that space other than a car being there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's on the internet. There's some really cool examples of what they've done in some places.
Okay. Matt, do you have any suggestions? No?
Can staff participate?
Of course.
Why doesn't somebody develop an app where you can look on your iPhone and see where the parking's available?
Like in San Francisco, that was one of mine.
Yeah.
I've heard of that. I think I've heard of that.
So you just drive into Littleton, look on their phone, and see where available parking spaces are. Mm-hmm.
You need an app for that? I thought you just needed to open your eyes.
Drive 2 more minutes.
I have some very obscure recommendations. On the EchoStar property north of Bowles, to create a bypass and then a bypass to downtown and create one of those huge bridges like they have on Wadsworth to cross Santa Fe. We could spend 1-point-something million for a bridge,
To somewhere.
to somewhere. And that would create safety across Santa Fe. And another really obscure item is a Littles Creek elevated throughway to bypass downtown Littleton when you're driving through.
I can't picture where that is.
I'm sorry, we want people to bypass Littleton? I missed that on our criteria list.
Hey, this is brainstorming.
Mm-hmm.
Another idea is bulldoze Essex House and provide parking, and and also provide parking for that shopping center that's there.
They're using a lot of the parking in the Essex House now. It's signed accordingly.
At lunchtime, yeah. Any other suggestions?
I have another one. And maybe this is more of a parking study. So the instead of parking parallel, parking diagonal. Does that? I don't know if that creates more spaces or not. So reevaluating how parking positioning on the streets.
Charlie Bloston just had an infarction.
Oh, what?
Infarction.
What happened? So obviously this has been asked before.
Yeah.
And the city was configured that way, too.
And they changed it. Mm-hmm. Did it work?
They were angled in.
It got changed when we widened the sidewalks downtown to provide more sidewalk activity, pedestrian activity.
So we got more sidewalks but less parking space? Is that what happened?
Seems like there's a lot of parking lots, particularly I notice on Prince and the little office buildings that, they just flatly don't allow anybody after hours to use those spaces. But I would think there would be a way to negotiate some agreements there.
Yeah, not just on Prince, but all over the place.
They're all over the place, yeah.
Well, and that also leads to inefficient land use, such as the empty lots, like for Jose's restaurant. It's an empty lot for most of the time. It's not improved or anything. It's just there because city code requires them to have additional parking.
That's a good point.
I'm going to give Charlie another little cause for a hard episode. Sooner or later, we ought to look at the property north of the melting pot as a potential parking lot / structure. One of the advantages of it as a structured parking is that contrary to the usual inefficiencies of a parking, especially a small parking structure, having to give up a lot of space to ramps. That site could be accessed both from the upper level at Main Street and the lower level down at Santa Fe. So there could be some efficiencies there. Aside from the fact that we know the underlying soils are filled with garbage and everything else.
North of the melting pot.
Oh, okay.
There's,
I was trying to figure out where that was. Okay.
yeah, there's some.
I've tried my best to figure out where the private property owned by, that goes along with the melting pot runs into the Skunk Hollow property, and I can't find anything, any place that shows me the point of demarcation.
Who knows, do they?
Charlie does have it. Yeah,
Oh, I'm sure Charlie has it. Knows it to the inch.
but, yeah, I've actually seen it. It is melting pot and then CDOT right away and then the city. So we've got 3 different owners in there.
And that's leased by the melting pot, is city property. And also, I did ask Charlie that question once, and he said it'd be very difficult to develop because it's sitting on top of landfill. And from what I understand, it was also the river used to run right there, too. So
That's why we drill piers around Denver a lot. Okay.
but that doesn't mean that we can't do
Develop
it.
a payment in lieu of parking plan?
Has there ever been a concerted effort with the city and Hoodlum or other business and landowners to get together and talk about what their ideas for parking are, what their solutions? Ever got together? and said,
Not that I know of.
We think will work? They just say, what do you guys have planned for us?
Yeah, not recently, definitely. And it's a great idea. It may have been during some of the parking studies, but those were 8 years ago. Was the most recent one?
I'd like to see a concerted effort with the landowners and business owners in the downtown area to see what they think would be reasonable. How much would they pay to have additional parking in the downtown area?
Any other ideas? Are we ready to move forward?
One more. I would explore additional opportunities to work in joint with RTD on use of accommodating their parking needs and use of their spaces in the downtime. I know they do have agreements with other municipalities along those lines.
Dave, did you have another? Oh, Jenny, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm still writing.
Okay. One other idea is to explore maybe options with the Rinke brother owner and possible innovative ideas for his site, and possibly with incorporating parking or mixed use. Or that site is a great site for a lot of opportunities.
Okay.
One of the things we've been talking about in the past and came up intermittently in some of the studies is the whole question of who needs to park where, for how long, at what times, that sort of thing. And I still don't, other than counting parking spaces and where they are, we've never really, none of the studies have really done that. I mean, I think we all know intuitively that spaces out in front of businesses are important to those businesses. You can't substitute a parking lot or structure 4 blocks away for the ability for somebody to pull up within visible distance of, 50 yards or whatever of a store, run in, do it, get what they're going to get, and be out in 15 minutes. So I'm thinking at some point we need to explore just how people use the street parking downtown. Not just somebody counting how many spaces are occupied at a given time, but I was thinking of just standing there and asking somebody, and they come up to their car and get in it. Can you tell me what your primary destination was, how long you were there, did you go what other places did you go to, and how long were you there altogether? Just simple information about how those spaces are used.
Those studies tend to be, I think, very useful. You tend to find different information from day to day. So, yeah.
And that may help us adjust things like the blanket 2-hour parking, which half of Hoodlum hates with a passion, and the other half of Hoodlum would fight tooth and nail to keep. So maybe we ought to find out how they're used and what the demand is before we start cavalierly saying, well, let's cut it to 1 hour, take the limit off, make it paid. Let's find out how it's used first.
I have one more. So either change the traffic patterns downtown from a parking perspective, so during certain hours, it would be almost like permit parking only, and the intent of that is to limit vehicle traffic downtown to encourage pedestrian traffic. So it's something that's used a lot in Europe for historic areas, so they're limiting the traffic that's going into those historic areas, so it gives more of the quality of pedestrian-friendly, meandering restaurants. So something to consider as a future state, I think, for the vision of downtown.
That reminded me of one thing, too, is in downtown Denver, I know they're looking at a lot of the one-way streets and trying to switch them back to two-way. And I think this has come up here before, and I have heard Charlie's opinion on it. But I think there are substantial benefits to business owners along a two-way street that aren't the same as along a one-way street. So perhaps it would warrant another look in terms of what other municipalities are seeing.
I'm not sure Charlie can stand 3 hard events in one evening. That's a little much.
It's brainstorming.
Sorry, Charlie.
Any other items to add? If not, final comments before we move to our additional reports from staff? All right, seeing no comments, let's move to additional reports from staff. Kirsten?
I don't have anything.
Glenn?
I don't have anything, unless you want to talk about future agenda items or future agenda, but I'll hold my comments till then.
Okay. And Doreen? Oh, okay. Dennis?
Notebooks.
Talk about was, what books do we like, and in addition to the books that that we have on parking that Doreen went ahead and kind of summarized for everybody, we have a bunch of others too. One that you may not be aware of, Craig knows this, it's a great book, and even if the material doesn't apply directly to what we're doing, the format is just unbelievably wonderful. It's an old book. It's called Pattern Language. It's out of Berkeley. There's a whole series of these, and actually pattern language now is used for technical manuals, for everything else in the world. But we've got a copy. Please borrow it from us. Go through it. The beautiful thing about it is you can go through and just pick out one thing you're interested in, and then you'll see how it's related to everything else. Because the concept is that things that we like, things that we enjoy, things that work well, tend to have similarities, and those are the patterns. And so they've gone through and tried to analyze what are those things. And it's pretty cool. So anyway, we've got that. This is old, but I think there's probably a more current one. Citizen's Guide to Planning. I don't know if you've all seen this or not. Done by a guy named Herb Smith, a local guy, and it's a good kind of basic tool in terms of here's what all this stuff is. You all know this by now, but there may be something in here that we're all surprised by, so it's kind of a fun thing. And then this one gets a little bit more gritty, but this is Kirsten's favorite book, Colorado Land Planning and Development Law. And it's something that we've got, and it really is useful if you've got particular questions or you just want some general background. It's all in here. So we've got those three. And then I couldn't find a copy of it, but if you've never read Jane Jacobs, Jane Jacobs is a classic, and it's more urban than we are. It's more intense, but the elements are very similar in terms of walkability and interest along the street, and just some very cool stuff that she talks about. And that was written late 60s, I think. So in Philadelphia, I believe is where she was. Or Montreal. Anybody know?
I think she just died, actually.
She just died a couple years ago. Yeah, it's Montreal, Toronto, somewhere. Anyway, East Coast. So it's more East Coast than we are. It's more urban than we are. But the essential elements and the excitement that she has is very cool in terms of how stuff works. If you want pedestrian friendliness anywhere in the city, it's a good way to look.
Wasn't her quote, "There's no there," I think is what you hear.
I think
That was Gertrude Stein about Oakland.
Was that Gertrude Stein?
It's still true, by the way.
it's still true.
What was the name of that book, that last one?
It's called The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jane Jacobs.
By the way, that's the second appearance for the pattern language in this particular venue.
Oh, really? What's the other one?
We talked about it early on
Yeah,
after
we
most
did.
of us joined
Yeah.
4 years ago.
Yeah.
And for those who are listening or those who are interested in the recently popular concept of the small house, building houses that are more compact, more sustainable, Sarah Suzanka, I think is... Susan Suzanka, whatever, and a few others are all disciples of the same crew that produced pattern language.
All this stuff, yeah.
And very consistent in their approach.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, so some of the stuff doesn't work. But at the same time, when you mentioned the parking, being inefficient, that's one of the things they talk about in here. There's some advantage to having small-scale parking kind of scattered around. It doesn't have the great impact. So it's one of the things to kind of look at in terms of trade-offs.
Including parking lots broken up with islands.
Right.
Okay.
On a slightly different topic, did the city decide where they were going to go with the mind mixer public outreach process?
We're doing it.
Really? Okay. I just was at a presentation on Friday. They're presenting it to the city and county of Denver, and they're thinking seriously of doing it as well.
Super. Great.
Do we want to talk what Mind Mixer is? And
We still taking other comments from commissioners in general?
we're getting to that after
Oh, okay.
HP board. But,
Oh, yeah, sorry.
so do we want to mention, Glenn, do you want to talk about Mind Mixer, a little bit about what it does and what we hope to get out of it? Or should we wait till another time?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is at your next meeting, I don't think we have any public hearing scheduled, so if we can do more of a work session, we can talk about the comp plan process, and that'll include Mind Mixer. And Dave and Linda were able to come to the presentation we had here from the consultants. It just seems like a great way of grabbing a bigger part of the population curve as far as getting comments on what we propose, ideas, and it's all web-based, and they basically host the site, and they give us very detailed demographics of the people that are commenting, so you can really draw some conclusions about what kind of population segments concerns or ideas are coming from. So, I'm not an expert on it, but I think it's one thing that I see as a great value in it is it reaches that group of the population that just cannot come to a public meeting at 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. And it's just a 24/7 way of people to brainstorm ideas and throw them out. And a lot of cities get really good results. And a lot of the cities don't do it just on a project base. They do it constantly, even with council agendas. If they know they have a hot issue on an upcoming council agenda, they put it out there on Mind Mixer and get a feel from the community. So they're not just going on the feel of the room that evening. They know what the community at large feels about whatever the issue might be. So we're pretty excited about it. We have a couple other ideas, and I know we're going to have a meeting next week with the chair and with the mayor and kind of talk about the process in general, but we've really left it broad because we know we want your fingerprints and your ideas on the process as well. So,
Okay. HP board? No meeting? Okay, so commissioners, how about we start with Jenny and go this way? Yeah? Dave?
Yes, several things. I'm going to commend certain articles for everyone's edification. In the commissioner, the APA brochure that we got in our mailing, there's an interesting article on, hold your ears, Glenn, form-based codes. Oh, see, I knew that. Actually, there's also one in the
Planning.
Planning Commissioner's Journal? No, the APA, the Planning Magazine. It's talking about hybrid form-based as a pair.
Yeah.
It's an interesting juxtaposition of ideas. Also in the latter in planning is an article on page 35 about land management and partnering between staff and applicants to try and expedite the process, which is consistent with what we've been trying to do to eliminate a lot of the rigmarole and expediting. I think all of those are things that, as we move through the rest of the comp plan, update and work with staff to reinvigorate or streamline. Matter of fact, I think in that last article they even used the word streamline of the processes. It's worth looking at. The other one, just in passing, in the CML Journal, February, on page 20 and 21, are two different ideas about or attitudes about citizen academies, not just specifically Planning Commission directed, but overall familiarity to get more people, develop more citizens' awareness of what goes on in the city, what the rules are, what can be done, what can't be done, get more people involved, which might be as much for staff and city council's edification as ours. And last, in the one, I didn't even know, I hadn't read this before tonight, Planning Commissioner's Journal, winter of 2012. There's a roundtable discussion about the roles of planning commissions and using them more effectively. I heartily recommend that for staff and city council as they build upon the workshop discussion from Friday.
Okay. Kurt? Craig?
I wonder if that's the same article that I read that talked about one city example where they separated long-range from short-range planning among the Planning Commission was really focused on the long-term issues, and they broke out another group or something that was focused on current planning reviews.
It was fairly apparent from the workshop, and I'm not going to cite exactly the source, that there's definite consideration to be given to just how much of the job of the Planning Commission should be really fall into City Council's bailiwick, how much of it should depend on professionalism from the staff as opposed to whatever diverse professional skills that planning commissioners happen to bring to the table. But I think as all that discussion proceeds from Friday, Glenn, I'd certainly like to see all of that put on the table and consequences, opportunities considered. Nice to hear it reinforced, Greg. Thank you.
Anything else? Steve? Okay.
I do have something. So this was triggered for me when we were having the discussions about, well, we need to understand the citywide goals first, but we wanted to focus on the Santa Fe corridor, and how do we go through the research and evaluation process to say, okay, how do they align? And so one of the things that we do a lot from a research perspective is quantitative versus qualitative, and this is just information just to help us understand what's the difference between quantitative and qualitative when you would use one versus the other. So when we think about Mind Mixer, that to me, and I wasn't part of the meetings, that to me sounds probably a little bit more quantitative. It's about reaching greater masses to try to really identify where there are certain segments or certain issues, et cetera. So I just have a printout I'm just going to share. Again, it's just for information. And we're currently using this methodology on a particular project that I'm working on, and we've actually, it doesn't say that one has to go before the other. They can complement. Sorry, I didn't make enough copies.
Maybe somebody can loan me theirs. Thank you.
But the way we're doing it right now is we're trying to identify a new segment for our business, and we're actually using quantitative research to really, try to identify how big of an opportunity there is or how big of a segment there is. And then that is actually going to feed into our qualitative, where then we're going to identify kind of those big areas and then go deeper into those areas to really understand what is the right product, what is the right offering. So it's just an approach that we may want to consider, for the city.
Anything else? Matt, do you have anything? No? So I guess it comes down to me. I would strongly encourage you to review online the city council meeting, last Friday's city council meeting, particularly with Glenn's presentation. So, and if we'll talk about that at the next meeting, then we can all be prepared. So in terms of agenda for the next meeting, Glenn, you mentioned the work session to discuss the comp plan process. Do we want to add anything to that, or?
Well, at your last meeting, you suggested Tom Christopite. That I guess he has come and spoke to the commission in the past.
Mm-hmm.
May tie into the discussion about the general plan as well.
Okay. Any other?
At our next meeting, will we be discussing these?
Well, those are council goals. No, we'll be specifically discussing the one that says update the 1981 comprehensive plan. So,
Wasn't that one of these?
yes, it's in there somewhere. I'm not
Tiny
sure which.
print.
Or continue to or something.
Here it is. I see it. Okay.
If the,
Mm-hmm.
there's one down.
Any other agenda items that we need to put on the list? So we're not talking about anything new per se, or some of the future agenda items we discussed previously. We're just going to spend the whole meeting on the process. Does that work for everyone? Dave?
Just a general question. Glenn, without passing judgment on where this is going or what was motivating it, there's an obvious intention to re-examine and probably even significantly modify the role, not just of the Planning Commission, but some of the other boards and commissions as well. Obviously, we're more concerned with the former. Any idea what the timeline on that is? Because in the meantime, we're still operating under the old rules to whatever extent they're certain instead of ambiguous. So any idea on timeline before we'll know how our role is going to be redefined?
No, I don't have a timeline on that. It's not significant change. I wouldn't say it's significant.
I don't think anybody can say that until we see what it is. But the words I kept hearing were more advisory in nature.
Strengthen your advisory role.
Yeah,
I think is
less hands-on, more advisory. Yeah, okay.
Well, it's my impression that I think we all view that as our role. We don't view our role as getting in there and writing it, and, we're just here.
Well, just as a for instance, one of the more than advisory roles we perform right now is approving or not PDOs. And that was one that was specifically suggested as an authority that ought to revert to City Council or ought to be considered for reverting to City Council. So that was the door opening. I'm just interested to see where it's going to go beyond that.
And just a comment, that has been discussed for years and years within the city, and I think it's been, a lot of the people that I talk to feel that it would be a good thing. But that's just my comment. You know, I have to say that I do have a number of concerns about the proposals, but we can discuss that at the next meeting. So, after everybody's had a chance to review the tapes. So,
It's only 6 or 7 hours, guys.
oh no, you can jump to the part on the comp plan.
That's only 5 or 6 hours, guys.
It was good discussion on Northeast neighborhood, too. Don't miss
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah.
That was good.
All right, anything else?
Move to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Wow. Thank you.